Hello everyone. Hope you're enjoying your day at HashiTalk Secure so far. My name is Rinaldi, and today I'll be bringing you through the immersive world of security within Gen AI. That is, with my particular talk, integrating generative AI in zero trust security with HashiCorp tools. So, without further ado, let's step straight into it. So, a bit about myself. As mentioned before, I'm Rinaldi. I'm currently working as a software engineer. I currently hold all Attendees certifications from AWS, and I'm also an AWS community builder. Have also been and currently am still an author and instructor. I currently also am a subject matter expert for the AWS Solutions Architect Professional and AWS Data Analytics Specialist certifications. I've been an international speaker at over 40 events and conferences. I'm also heavily involved in the meetup community, have organized a few meetups myself, and currently am the organizer of the Melbourne Python meetup. And in general, I just enjoy all things AWS, open source, music, and virtual reality. So that's just a bit about myself. So what's the agenda looking like for today? Well, we're going to firstly talk about introduction to zero trust architecture, kind of a refresher for those who are not so familiar with what it is, what's comprised of. And after that, we're going to be taking a bit of a look into AI and security. We're then going to be looking into how we can code it up, how we can implement it within our own use cases, and also see a bit about how we can really be able to adapt it towards our own use cases. We're going to be looking at the challenges and considerations we need to think about towards the future in utilizing these kinds of technologies. And finally, I'm just going to be walking through some final tips and takeaways from this talk. Now, let's step through a bit of introduction to zero trust architecture. So, zero trust architecture really is just an architecture where trust is never assumed. You're really assuming that everyone in general is a bad actor, and what you can do to be able to counteract this is continually request for verification wherever necessary. You continually try to request people for verification on they are who they are, and this is why the principle of least privilege is very important. And it also falls into the need for microsegmentation. You're segmenting different parts of the business. You're really being able to communicate to stakeholders that they need to be in a part of the business and they need to be responsible for verifying their identity without the assumption that people are who they say they are. It's especially becoming a bigger thing these days, especially with the recent developments in AI, more threat vectors being opened up with, for instance, voice phishing or people hijacking laptops, for instance, laptops getting hacked. There are a lot of cases that has been making this even more important of an issue to talk about than ever before. And that's why I'm here also giving this talk. It's to share a bit of my best practices and how Gen AI is able to contribute towards that. So it's something that we need to continually keep in mind as AI develops, especially given that there's continually new attack vectors that are open, and we need to be cautious about being able to deal with them. This brings us to the importance of zero trust in cybersecurity. As mentioned before, there is a great need to be able to limit lateral movement. When we look at different architectures and when we look at the best practices that take place within enterprises, for instance, cybersecurity is a very great thing, and it's a big deal there because, well, you are spreading the security that you have throughout the different segments that you have indicated for the business. And being able to segment this into different segments and being able to prevent one attack from spreading to another is a very important thing. That's how you limit potential attacks from spreading into other devices, for instance, or having a particular impact cause a ripple effect across all the devices. And that's very important. We need to hence reduce the attack surfaces that is possible from this kind of landscape. We need to be able to decrease the amount of potential attack vectors that people have and that could be possible from what people are doing. It's a very big thing and it's continually an issue, and that's why people will continue talking about this. We need to enhance the data protection that we have within businesses and being able to enhance how we deal with these issues. It's often a thing that people believe that the security team is the sole personnel involved in being able to mitigate such attacks, but it's actually very important for everyone in general to be able to have that notion of security and their contribution towards being able to secure the enterprise as something on the forefront of their mind. That brings me to the concept of DevSecOps. It's something that I talk about a lot, and it's essentially the belief that everyone within the DevOps lifecycle should be able to have that security element embedded into it, hence the security element of DevSecOps. You need to be able to incorporate security into every phase of the DevOps lifecycle, and that's really what we need to get out of this. We need to be able to protect more surfaces. We need to be able to implement more mitigations and have everyone responsible for security. So, how is AI used in security in particular? The role of AI itself is to be able to automate threat detection, predict vulnerabilities, and enhance the response time. So, oftentimes, we know if you've already been on call, for instance, one of the things that you will most likely face is a pager duty alert or something like that that happens to you at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And it's really a pain because you have to wake up, you need to deal with things, and it's always a big thing. And it's never a great thing. You have to wake up your kids, you need to wake up. It's really, well, you don't wake up your kids, you accidentally wake them up. But my point is, it's a really big thing that unfortunately does happen. And it's something that you continually need to think about. That's why with AI, we're able to bring this to a greater, more enhanced way of responding to these kinds of events. And we can do this by automating the process, being able to automate the threat detection that's being done. Because we can predict these vulnerabilities from happening, hence providing suggestions on being able to deal with these kinds of issues. And this really helps a lot with being able to prevent these issues before they actually happen, or even automate the threat detection that from in dealing with these issues when they actually occur, so that for the smaller scale issues, you can actually just automate the fixes and have the fixes automatically be applied to the problems. And hence, you don't have to get up 3, 4 a.m. in the morning for that particular pager duty alert and instead have AI take on it. Now, I say this take it with a grain of salt because at the same time, it's very experimental. Right now, it's being used for very small solutions, but definitely when it comes to bigger security alerts or risks, it definitely would not be advisable to use AI to automate that process. So it definitely is dependent on the use case. But there's different types of AI as well. Machine learning, for instance, you can learn from the historical data and predict accordingly based on that historical data. And of course, generative AI itself, to be able to create the different predictions and the simulations that you can take into account, which would be very powerful to be able to simulate the specific scenario or be able to prepare you for different kinds of use cases or different kinds of attacks that might happen. And also be able to automate the process for you. That's one of the things that I've played around with, for instance, and I'm going to be talking about in a bit as well. So, how is Gen AI in particular used within cybersecurity? Although the definition of Gen AI is supposed to be generating new data from existing patterns. So, how does it really factor in within cybersecurity? There's really a number of use cases. First, you can use it to simulate network behavior. You can use it for being able to predict vulnerabilities, and you can essentially create security policies with it, which is a few of the use cases that we'll be looking at in today's talk. Mind you, that's not limited to only this. There's a lot of use cases that you can get from being able to have Gen AI in cybersecurity. But these are the ones that we'll be looking at closely for this talk. Now, where does Terraform fit into the picture then? Well, you can really be able to define infrastructure as code with this usage of generative AI and be able to enhance zero trust, hence with Terraform. You can integrate the AI models for threat detection into your workloads and be able to automate the deployment that you are to do across the different platforms that you already have. You can essentially streamline your workflow and have AI help you in the process because you can generate full code directly for Terraform or policies based on your logs, for instance, just with a single prompt. And it's a massive thing because that will save you so much time and also be able to help you identify things that you might have missed. It also follows through with Consul too, because with Consul, we can define service intentions. We can apply policies for authentication and encryption based on Gen AI. So Gen AI not only allows us to be able to parse these particular service intentions and pretty much generate them too, but be able to also apply them through combining it with the tools that HashiCorp provides. You can also monitor network behavior dynamically. For instance, when you have a suspicious network activity, you can parse the data, and then after that, you can pretty much just have the suspicious activity reported on, and based on historical evidence, then make a prediction of if this is something that we should be looking at more closely, and if so, suggest remediations based on it. So it really is a bit of a process that we go through in integrating generative AI with Terraform and Consul. So it goes through a 6-step process. First, we look to train generative AI on network data that we have. So network data, as you are already familiar, might be captured from different ways. It might be captured based on your cloud provider. It might be captured based on your own usage. It's essentially not hard to be able to capture this, but it's great to be able to then feed this into Gen AI to be able to understand what kind of activity you are usually involved in and what would warrant as a suspicious activity. When I say train, I also mean that it might also either be fine-tuning or it might just also be simple prompts that get the Gen AI used to it. Because I know that you in fine-tuning or in training models from scratch, it often takes up a huge portion of the cost. So oftentimes I often just play around with a simple approach as well. You can then use Terraform to deploy AI enhanced policies. So the workflow essentially goes with generative AI, training on it, then having Terraform deploy the AI enhanced policies that is generated from the network data that you already have. So you're using this then to be able to counteract issues that might happen later. And because the Gen AI model that you have is already trained on the network configurations, you can then understand a bit more on what would have to be prevented and what would be suggested and have GenAI then generate a Terraform file to be able to then be used for deployment. And you can automate this process as well. You can pretty much just have it deployed based on a workflow that you have. You can continuously also update the policies based on new data that comes in then later on, continually reviewing it, or you can automate the process and have GenAI run a new check every time for new data periodically that comes in from time to time. And it's a great way of being able to continually stay updated and abreast of all the potential security vulnerabilities that might be taking place. You can also use it to analyze service traffic that comes through so that you can update your console configurations appropriately. This will then lead you to being able to dynamically generate service intentions for console and be able to then continuously monitor and adjust the security settings so that your deployments can be functioning as you would expect them to. And you can continually be abreast of the security vulnerabilities and mitigations that you need to put in place for being able to counteract vulnerabilities that may pop up. So, bit of a walkthrough through the different kinds of needs for a live demonstration of this. I'll firstly motivate this a bit with understanding a bit for what tools we are going to be using in walking through the code that I'll be showing in a bit for live demonstrations. So one of the components that we will need is ChatGPT firstly. So in this case, we'll be using ChatGPT for policy creation. We can then use Terraform for deployment, and we'll then use Consul for service management. So first, what we need to do is to generate a policy. And as part of this, what we really want to be able to do is 3 steps. We want to be able to input network data into using a GPT model. We then want to generate the security policies as part of that. And we then look into reviewing the policies for accuracy. So as you can see over here, I have a function called generate security policy. And what I'm doing over here is that I'm basically just creating a declaration and putting through a prompt basically just says that you are a helpful assistant that generates network security policies. What I really want to get out from this is just being able to set the context for being able to have the GPT 3.5 model to then take in and respond based on that. So this helps out a lot in being able to identify that. And aside from that, you can then say also the instructions you want to explicitly put through. Which in this case is generate a network security policy based on the following data. You can then put through the specific network data that you want to put through. And accordingly, you'll then return the response. So you will then return the policy. And what we can then do is that we can just generate the network security policy and just print out the policy for us to review before we then execute accordingly. So it's a great way of being able to automate this process instead of having to review the content and go through the process yourself again. After that, we'll then look at deploying the policy. So this is an example of a particular network configuration that was generated from the GPT model. As you can see, for instance, in this case, it was able to generate a particular deployment that involves allowing the SSH and allowing outbound traffic. So this is based on the needs that it has seen based on the network traffic and the instructions that are provided to. This saves you a lot of time from needing to either search for a template that you can modify or just being able to directly do everything yourself. So it really is a time saver. So with this, you can deploy the policies using Terraform and execute it just like how you would manually. And you can do this autonomously. You can then apply this across the cloud platforms that you need, whether it be, for instance, from AWS or Azure. And in general is just based on your own requirements. You can then verify the deployment success. Have a step in the CI/CD pipeline that is able to help you verify whether this was a successful deployment. It's a great way of being able to work with Gen AI and be able to automate the process of creation of these kinds of templates. You can then look at managing the policies. For instance, in this case scenario, we want to manage policy with Consul. What we want to do is we want to monitor the service traffic. We can then adjust the policies based on real-time data too. So this is an example of a piece of Consul code that I was able to accordingly align based on feeding the specific real-time data that I had and also the console configuration that I already had existing, and it hence was able to then adapt it accordingly based on what I already had. So you can see over here, for instance, that we're pretty much able to appropriately define the necessary ATL, the connect, service. So this all is pretty much very adaptable based on your use case. All you need to do is pretty much just put through the context that you want to generate, and you can either feed your existing console configuration, or you can just create one from scratch too. Either way, this really helps with being able to facilitate for better management in terms of how you are able to automate your policy creation, which can be adjustable later on. So things such as the port, for instance, they can pretty much be adjusted based on your own use cases. I would always say that it's good to keep these things manual because it's important that there is some manual review being done before you actually just fully automate these kinds of processes, because there's always room for error no matter how advanced your implementation may be. So this way you can really be able to create a autonomous workflow. So as you can see, there's a lot of benefits that can be derived from this. First, there's the aspect of improved security because you can get automated threat detection and also adaptive policies. You can continually have your LLM model, such as GPT, review the policy and update it accordingly. And after that, have it subject to a human in the loop process, where then a human can review the updated policy before then choosing to deploy it again. I always feel like this is the optimal configuration because you can then check and ensure that what you're deploying will not be breaking something, and just make sure that what's being deployed will really help the system. It really helps as well in terms of operations and being able to be efficient in them. You can reduce the manual configuration that you need to do because you are automatically processing these kinds of new activities and continually staying abreast with your configurations, while also continually streamlining the network management process. So you can decrease the time that you need for reviewing these manually and instead have generative AI models review these for you and streamline it for you. There are, of course, challenges and considerations that you have to take into account for this. First is false positives, and this shouldn't come up as big a surprise. It's often that we have a lot of false positives. For instance, when we set up monitors as well in AWS, and there's something that alerts you, turns out it's actually just a one-time thing. It's the same with these kinds of models too. They might detect something or tag something that they think is something that should be looked at, although it shouldn't be. So it really depends on how you also train your model. So it depends on some stuff. Aside from that, there might be bias as well onto what is risky and what is not. And that is why it's important to train it based on your model. But again, this is subject to each organization's needs. So of course, this isn't a one-stop thing. You have to tailor it towards your own use case and try to find balance between cost and performance. Integration might be a complex thing, especially if you are an enterprise and you already have a functioning application that has a lot of considerations or security specific needs, or it might be just complex to integrate that. There's always that consideration. You'll also need to think about how you can facilitate for continuous model training, have it stay updated. Do you want a process where you manually train these data, or do you want a process where you periodically have your network data, for instance, fed into the Gen AI models so that it can continuously be trained? So these are some challenges as part of that. And that leads to being able to just balance security and usability. How do you make that room for usability while being able to still balance the security element and make sure that not only people are maintaining security, but ensure that people can actually use what is being currently implemented and have it not too complex. There's going to be a lot of future trends that you'll have to think about. First is, of course, having quantum resistant algorithms. There's always the possibility of attacks that might be much more than historically available, such as from quantum-based algorithms. Or so this is pretty much where the discussion of quantum resistant algorithms then comes in. How can you make your algorithms robust enough so that it can resist quantum computers from being able to catch up? Aside from that, there's definitely going to be much more discussions on advanced behavior analytics, how you can prevent social engineering attacks or other specific behaviors that might not exactly be caught from normal network data to be factored into consideration for your security needs. This is also going to then lead into the increased adoption of AI enhanced models to be able to then automate the process even more and see the different areas that this can really help in. And of course, that will eventually lead to more granular microsegmentation to be able to counteract these issues more, hence leading to a even more bigger culture of zero trust security. So some best practices are regularly update your AI models, monitor your network traffic closely, implement the least privileged access policies, make sure you test and control environments. Don't just go prod directly. Make sure you do a lot of testing before you actually put these kinds of integrations forward, and make sure that you balance security with performance. And just a short case study as well. This has been implemented as well as a project in my experience. And one of the things that I learned from this is that continuous monitoring is key, because it's something that you need to continuously look at and continuously manage from a high point of view. And you need to ensure that the AI models are able to improve the effectiveness. Because from my experience, feeding these kinds of network data into the AI models is really able to help it stay abreast of things. And my experience is like the biggest challenge is being able to tailor things accordingly and be able to stay abreast with everything. And it's sometimes not an easy thing, and that's why it's a very important consideration. So some key takeaways: zero trust enhanced security. Generative AI will optimized protection. Integration with Terraform and Consul is powerful. There's many considerations you need in ethics, such as the learning curve and everything. And experimentation with what works is going to be key. So that's all for me. Thank you so much. And feel free to connect with me on any of my socials. Happy to answer any questions after this or during in my socials. And hope you enjoy the rest of your time at the conference.